When we begin to understand biblical prophecy, what's about to happen next is going to affect the whole planet Earth. We lost our land, our culture, and our identity. There is a great awakening amongst the scattered tribes, and now we must return to the covenant of our forefathers. The Father chose out of all nations the nation of Israel. Okay, shalom, shalom, Mishpachar. I pray that everybody is having a great morning so far. I'm your brother Kasada Bar, and today we're going to be going over, it might be slightly controversial. You know what? It is. Everything is controversial, all right? Because everybody has their own thoughts, opinions, and ideas, and I can respect that. But when I do my classes, what I like to do is to bring out as much information as possible to try and substantiate my position according to scripture. All right. So that's going to be very important for me as we do today's lesson. Another thing I want to bring to everyone's attention here this morning is this is going to be kind of long here. All right. So this is going to be pushing 2 hours. So I pray that everyone is able to hang in there with me. So get your libations, your whatever it is that keeps you motivated. All right. Try to bring those things along. And if we need to take a break, I'll keep an eye on the chat and we can take a 5-minute break. But I believe that it is very important for us to look into the 2,300 evenings and mornings. Okay, for the advanced readers. All right, so before we get started, Mr. Ricard, let's do the Father's prayer. As always, we want to make sure that we give all esteem to the Father for every single thing that he does for the nation of Israel. So let's begin with it, and let's do the Hebrew first, then we'll do it in English. Abinu, Shabbat Shamayim, Yit Kudas Shemka, O Yit Barak Melkutka, Retsumka Yahiye Ishui, Ba Shamayim, U Ba Aretz, Ut At Ayin, Lakminu Tamadit, Umakulanu, Kataatenu, Kaasher Anachnu, Mukhalim, U Al Tabi Ainu Layide, Nasayon, U Sham Ranu Makar Rag, and again, all the esteem belongs to the Father. And we thank the Father for sending his Son, Yahushua Ha'Mashiach, who is the atoning sacrifice for the nation of Israel. Hallelujah. Now what I would like to do, Mishpachar, is do it the way that I was taught from the very beginning. All right. I know that it's very controversial, but again, this is how I learned the Father's prayer from the very beginning. And I appreciate it. Okay. I really appreciate it. Abinawa, Shabbat Shemayim, Kudash, Haya, Shamka, Yahuah, Malak Wafka, Thaba'a, Ratazaka, Haya, Aisha, Ba'aratazah, Kawa, Haya, Bashamayim, Nathan Lanawa, Lakam Kal Yawum, Wasalak Lanawa, Kawab Wathinawa, Kastalak Lanawa, Kawab Wathinawa, Wala'a, Thabaya Anawa, Badasayuan, Abal, Hawashayanawa, Mayan, Rai, Kaya, Laka, Hamalakwath, Walahala, Wahatha Paharath, Lahai Walam, all esteem, again, belongs to the Father through his Son, Yahushua HaMashiach. And I also want to make this this claim here, Mishpachar, is that I believe in the Mashiach that came during the first century. I do understand also the two phases of the coming of the Mashiach. One was to atone for the sins of the nation of Israel, where we have Yahusha, the son of Yahuseph, and then we have the second coming of the Mashiach, which is Yahusha, the son or the ben of Dawood. So that's going to be very important. And what I would like to do sometime in the near future is to break down what I mean by Yahushua HaMashiach, the son of Joseph, and Yahushua HaMashiach, the son of Dawood. So, Mr. McCobb, what we're about to do is dive in. Like I said, I'm going to be keeping my eye on the live chat here. If anybody have any questions, anything like that, please bring it to my attention, and I'll try to expound upon it as best as I can. So, Mr. McCobb, we have a brief video that I would like to share with you guys first, all right? And again, the title of today's class is the 2300 Evenings and Mornings for the Advanced Reader. All right, again, for the advanced reader. So this video that you're about to see, Mr. McCaw, is for educational purposes only. Once again, it's for educational purposes only. And everybody sees and is aware of what's going on between Israel and Iran. A good brother of mine, Emmanuel, sent me this clip, and I think it would be very important to share this information with you as we dive into today's class. All right, so let's go ahead to the video, and it's for educational purposes only.
If you're watching Western media coverage of the Iran-Israel crisis, you might be witnessing a rather upside-down, topsy-turvy, bizarro view of the world, of reality. You're not being told everything. You're being given skewed perceptions. For example, if you're watching Western media coverage, you might come away with the impression that Iran attacked Israel out of the blue and Israel is responding, when it's the other way around. We all saw on Thursday night that it was Israel that launched an illegal act of aggression against Iran. Iran is the victim here, Israel is the aggressor, but in the Western media coverage, Israel is the victim always. Some other points you may miss while watching Western media coverage: for example, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, Israel does. Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, Israel isn't. Iran has allowed IAEA inspectors into its country, Israel doesn't. It's a nuclear double standard that I raised with former Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon a few years back on my Al Jazeera English show Head to Head, in a clip that's recently gone viral again.
How many nuclear weapons does Israel have? Because experts say it's anywhere between 80 and 400.
So what?
So what?
Yeah, so what? Has Israel ever threatened?
Do you recognize the hypocrisy of Israel
No.
having a secret illicit nuclear weapons program that it won't open up its doors to and won't talk about, and then lecturing everyone else in the region about nuclear weapons?
Absolutely not. You know why?
You talked about hypocrisy. Let me ask again. If an Iranian guest came on my show and I asked him about Iran's nuclear program, he said, I don't know, I'm not going to talk about it. Would you be okay with that? You'd be outraged.
Of course I
And
would
yet you
be.
sit here as a former minister of the Israeli government saying, I don't know, never talked about nukes with anyone.
Because there was like 16 United Nations Security Council resolutions against Iran.
And there is
was a
against Israel.
signatory
And there is
Iran.
against Israel as well.
About
About your nuclear
issues?
program?
No.
Yes, there is. UN
So-
Resolution 487. Let me read it to you. The UN Security Council in 1981 says, calls upon Israel urgently to place its nuclear facilities under the safeguards of the IAEA. Why haven't you done that?
Because
There you have it, the nuclear double standard. Israel violates multiple UN Security Council resolutions when it comes to its own stockpile of nuclear weapons. And yet Western media interviewers who have multiple Israelis on air all the time never really ask about this, never really ask about Israel's nukes. Why? I get why Israel wants to maintain its policy of nuclear ambiguity, of not confirming or denying that it has nukes. But why does the US media, the UK media, the Canadian media, why do they all have to go along with it?
Okay, Ms. McCarr, I wanted to show that video because I believe that there is a double standard. And again, that video was for educational purposes only. I don't want to be flagged because we know how sensitive this topic can be as we look and see what's going on once again between Iran and Israel. Everybody knows that I have been looking at the book of Daniel very heavy for over 6 months now. I believe that there's a lot of important information that we can learn from it. And let's see what we can make out of the 2,300 evenings and mornings. And again, this is for the advanced reader. So as I do in all of the presentations that I do, I want to give all of my peace and blessings to all of the family out there. As we hold fast to the knowledge that we have, we want to make sure that we stay in direct tune with Torah, because I believe that we're living in some very interesting times now. So the purpose of this service is to simply explain the mystery behind the 2,300 evenings and mornings in conjunction with the 1,260-year prophecy. For starters, the 1,260 years began roughly around 538 AD. Again, the 1,260-year prophecy began around 538 AD. That's going to be extremely important as we do this presentation here this morning. And the 2,300 evenings and mornings started with the 490-year prophecy of Yahushua Ha'Mashiach. This was the same time when Israel was given the opportunity to restore the priesthood. So you have to keep in mind, Israel served 70 years of captivity under the Babylonians. After that was done, we now have Israel given the permission to rebuild the priesthood, the temple, and the city, and this happened around 457 BC. Once again, this occurred after serving 70 years in captivity for breaking the covenant relationship that was made at Mount Sinai in approximately now around 1312 BC. So, as you see, Mr. Carr, I want to try to give out as much proof, as much receipts as possible. I want to give dates. I want to give names. I want to even share with you, with the Mr. Kai here this morning, where I'm getting my information from. A lot of academia reports, Mr. Glenn. There's a couple of guys out there that have some very good information that I gleaned from, along with my understanding, my readings and prayer and meditating and double checking the sources. That's the thing. When we read commentary, when we're reading anything that we're reading, especially when it involves scripture, try to make sure that you also do your own personal research, because when it comes time for you to present your argument, you always want to make sure that you did your homework. All right? Make sure that you do your homework. Mr. McCall, it's very important, I believe, that we pay attention to detail. Paying attention to details is going to be very critical, especially as we go into today's topic. So, why is Daniel 8 so important? How can we, with all confidence, know we're interpreting the book of Daniel correctly? I believe the key to understanding Daniel 8 is that Daniel sees not one vision. Okay, we coming right off the bat with this whole thing here, all right? The key to understanding Daniel 8 is that Daniel sees not one vision, but two visions. When you understand Daniel sees two visions, you will see how clearly the entire chapter comes together, as well as the remaining chapters in Daniel. If you were to casually read Daniel 8, you might naturally conclude that Daniel only sees one vision. However, when we inspect the original Hebrew words for vision, and that's going to be the key, and this is where a lot of times I get opposition. When we begin to look at the text in this original language, which is Hebrew, for example, the book of Daniel was written in Aramaic. The book of Daniel, the 8th chapter, you find some Aramaic, but mostly Daniel 8, you're going to find a lot of the scriptures being shared with us is in Hebrew. So, the original Hebrew words for vision, we discovered that Daniel sees two distinct, and related visions. How do we mean, or what do we mean by this? Look at Daniel 8:26, all right? I even have the scriptures pulled up for us to try to make this thing as easy as possible so everything will go smooth. And again, I'm going to keep my eyes on the chat to see whether or not there's any questions regarding anything that I'm saying. So, and shalom to everybody, all right? I definitely want to say peace and blessings to everyone that's on the line here. I really appreciate your participation. But let's look at Daniel 8:26. Now, we're going to use bold blue for one vision and bold red for the other vision. And there's a reason for this now. Now, take a look at, and I pray that you have your Bibles along with you, because you really need to pay very close attention to what's going on, because I really believe that it has some bearing on what's happening today. So watch this. I'm going to be reading that from the NSAB version, but you can read from the Blue Letter Bible or the Septuagint. That's going to be important. But Daniel 8:26, it reads this way. It says the vision, but I have the word vision here in blue for a reason. The vision of the evenings and the mornings, which has been told is true. So remember that I said now is that the word vision, and we have evenings and mornings. The evenings and mornings pertain to a specific time in history. And we're going to get into that. Which is told is true, but the vision in red, keep it secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. And only thing that a person would have to do when you look at Daniel 8:26, put your little icon. It's going to have a Strong's number, and it's going to give you now the word kazon and the word more. All right, the word kazon and the word more. Now, we're going to get into the vowel pointing system a little bit here, but we have the word kazon and the word more. It's spelled M-A-R-E-H, all right, but I'm going to show from my research that it's pertaining to a person. This more here is a person. Watch how this goes. The original Hebrew uses two different words for vision. Both Hebrew words have the same meaning in English. The Hebrew words for vision are kazon and more. Now, the word more means appearance, sight, or vision. The word kazon means revelation, sight, or vision. Again, paying very close attention to detail is going to help us to understand, all right, the book of Daniel as we go ahead with the rest of the chapters here. So let's go ahead, all right, because we have a lot that we have to cover. Now, when translators encountered these two Hebrew words, they translated them as a single meaning and word, vision. However, there's a reason why the original Hebrew has two distinct words for vision. Again, we must make sure that we look at scriptures from a Hebraic perspective. We must leave our Western minds, our Western thoughts, leave that aside for a minute. Daniel was a Hebrew, and he spoke Hebrew and he spoke Aramaic. At least those two languages there. So let's continue to read on, but remember, keep it Hebraic. So, however, there's a reason why the original Hebrew has two distinct words for vision. It is because the two different words would indicate to the reader that Daniel sees two separate visions. Knowing that, look at the verse again, okay, with the original Hebrew words bolded, colored, and inserted in brackets. Watch this now. Daniel 8:26. The vision, which is the more of the evenings and the mornings, which has been told, is true. But keep the vision, which is the kazon, secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Now, that should be self-explanatory there. Only thing that we did was define the word vision in blue, and it means more. More. But the other vision in red, when you just hit your little icon, all right, on your tablets or whatever it is that you're using, your lexicons, your strong concordance, it's going to have the word kazon. So the vision, which is the more, is for evenings and mornings. And the other vision is a kazon to keep that secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Let's move on. Now, the 2000 or the 2300 evenings and mornings for the advanced reader. Watch how easy this goes as long as we stay and stick to the format. Daniel 8:14. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And like I said, Mr. Carr, we're going straight for the jugular right off the bat. Now, when it says unto the 2,300 evenings and mornings, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed, this is not talking about the temple being cleansed during the first century, that temple that was standing at that time. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the heavenly sanctuary. After 2,300 evenings and mornings, then shall the heavenly sanctuary be cleansed. We're not talking about that defiled system, that defiled sanctuary that was standing during the first century that was polluted by the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And this is the reason why, again, when you check out your history, that temple was renovated by Herod. All right. Herod, the Edomite. So let's make sure that we put everything in its proper perspective. We're not talking about that sanctuary that was standing during the first century and eventually destroyed in 70 AD. Now, while the first temple, the one built by Solomon, lay in ruins, the prophet Daniel received several visions from the sovereign that describe future scenes in the heavenly sanctuary. So remember, there's an earthly sanctuary that was a representation of the heavenly sanctuary. And this is my whole thing here, is that there must be an example of righteousness on earth the way that it is in heaven. This is the reason why we do the prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, set apart be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Moses was given a architectural design of a tabernacle, I believe, in heaven. And what Moses was supposed to do now is make a replica of that tabernacle here on earth. So you have this connection between heaven and earth. And me personally, I don't believe that there is that example of righteousness on earth today the way that it's being displayed on or in heaven. So the model that we see in heaven must be displayed here. So heaven and earth must mimic one another in righteousness. So let's go ahead. And just as the daily sacrifice on earth was designed to point the Hebrews to the Messiah's death for their sins, so their yearly Day of Atonement pointed forward to another of his works in his mission to redeem humanity. The final work of the high priest in the heavenly sanctuary, and I believe that that heavenly high priest is Yahushua HaMashiach. And this again, and we're going to get into this whole thing with Antiochus Epiphanes, because some people believe that the little horn is actually Antiochus Epiphanes. And those of you that have been following along with me, you know that I don't believe that. All right. The 2,300 evenings and mornings is going to be very important because it is laid out to us that it can't be 2,300 literal days. Not literal days here, but this is an actual prophecy. Meaning now is that according to the instructions that Moses shared with the Levites, and as the Father shared to Moses, and as Moses shared to the Levitical priesthood, you can only cleanse the sanctuary one time a year, not every single day. That is fallacy. That is not correct. You can only cleanse the sanctuary one time a year. That's during the 7th month, the 10th day. So this would mean now 23 times 1, or 2,300 times 1 is going to actually give you now 2,300 evenings and mornings. Not 2,300 literal days, as some people like to do it, but this is actually talking about 2,300 evenings and mornings, as it defines itself as 2,300 years. Then the sanctuary should be cleansed. And we'll elaborate on that a little bit more as we go ahead with the presentation here. Now watch how things begin to unravel here. Now, in one of these extraordinary visions, Daniel saw a ram with uneven horns pushing west, north, and south. That is very important for us to understand. These locations where this ram with uneven horns is pushing west, north, and south, and conquering every beast he met, which is in the book of Daniel, 8th chapter, verses 3 and 4. Now, just to let you know that this ram that we're talking about here is making reference to the Medo-Persian Empire, with the Medes coming up first, and then we have the Persians coming up at the end. And so as the messenger Gabriel is speaking to Daniel, it said that the angel Gabriel later appeared and explained to the prophet Daniel, the ram which you saw having 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. That is in the book of Daniel 8 and 20. Okay, let's move on. So the 2,300 evenings and mornings for the advanced reader. Now, Daniel, the 8th chapter, verse 21 and 22. Daniel then saw another powerful animal attack the ram, breaking his horns. The male goat is the kingdom of Greece. To be more specific, Alexander the Greek, some say Alexander the Freak, all right? Whatever way you want to go, but it was Alexander the Greek, all right? So the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. As for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in this place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation. So every nation had its time to rule. We had, we're talking about the book of Daniel, the 8th chapter here now. So we have the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medo-Persian Empire was destroyed by the first king of Greece, which is Alexander the Greek. And when Alexander the Greek died, it made mention that 4 notable ones came up in his stead. And those 4 notable ones are Cassandra, Lysichamus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Once again, Cassandra, Lysichamus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Now, history affirms that Greece conquered the Medo-Persian Empire, so it is clear that the large horn on this goat represents Alexander the Greek, the first king. And just as the vision foretold, after his death, the empire was divided among his 4 generals, symbolizing the 4 horns. But then Daniel sees in vision another power that will arise after Greece. All right. A little horn. All right. Now, this little horn, again, we must make sure that we pay very close attention to detail. It makes mention that this little horn grew Watch this now. Exceedingly. That's going to be very important as we see how these kingdoms transition from one king or one kingdom to the next. Detail. The little horn, which grew exceedingly great. Watch what happens now. It grew exceedingly great towards the east and towards the glorious land, towards the south, towards the east, and toward the glorious land. And everybody knows in context, the glorious land would be the nation of Israel or Jerusalem. And then we're going to have a picture at the end of this slide here. And who do you believe that world power arose after Greece? That's the thing. What world power arose after Greece? And this is where it gets real tricky. And reading and studying history is going to be very important, because a lot of people say that the next horn or power that comes up exceedingly great is Antiochus Epiphanes. And like I said earlier, I totally disagree with that. Okay, then, but let's see what we have here. All right, let's go ahead and read Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 1 and 2, to try to help solve this mystery here. Now, in Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 1 to 2, it has, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, which is Daniel, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, Persia, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Now, I had asked everyone earlier if they could pay very close attention to what's going on with this word kazon and this word more. Now, looking at Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 1 to 2, every single time that you see this word vision here, it is referring to the kazon. The kazon. C-H-A-Z, I think, C-H-A-Z, I think it's O-W-N. Kazon. It's not pertaining to the more yet. And what happens now is that a lot of people overlook that. And I'm sharing here today is that we don't want to leave no stones unturned, because we have, again, one vision, meaning the kazon, and the other vision is going to be the appearance of a more. A more. Watch how the story gets even more intrigued. Now, I also want to share too now is that, remember, Daniel is in the Babylonian captivity and he's seeing a vision. He's in the trance and he's seeing things that is going to happen in the future as it pertains to the nation of Israel. Now, let's see here. I wanted to make sure. Oh, just for the record, the word vision is the Strong's number 2377. All right, 2377. And the kazon now is 2,300 evenings and mornings. The Strong's number again for kazon is 2377. When you read Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 1 through 2, and the word kazon is 2,300 evenings and mornings. Now, let's move on to the next slide. Then I, Daniel, lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns. A lot of this now is going to be repetitive, but I want you, brothers and sisters, to see how important it is, again, to pay very close attention to detail. So once again, Then I, Daniel, lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last, which is the Persians. The Medes came up first. And I saw the ram pushing. Watch this now, because direction is very important. I saw the ram pushing westward. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, which is a ram. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and he became great. Now watch this now, paying very close attention to detail. Now, the Medo-Persian Empire, it became great. All right? It became great. Let's read on. Now, we made mention now of the direction that the ram was actually pushing. So what does it mean that the ram was pushing in three separate locations? Since the ram is butting in three directions, we can conclude that the kingdom of the Medes and Persian they was conquering land, to the west, north, and south. Those are the exact geographic locations that Medo-Persia conquered. So when we look at the map below, the lands to the west, north, and south include Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. Okay? Lydia, not Libya, but Lydia, is an area that is commonly known as Turkey today. Now, looking at the four metals, you have the gold representing Babylon. Then you have the silver representing the Medo-Persian Empire. Then you have the brass, which represents the Greeks. And then you have the iron that represents the Romans. And then it makes mention of the 10 toes. And then after the 10 toes, we see the little horn. That is the order of concession when we look at now the four metals. But take notice now that it also makes mention of these four metals representing beasts. And we know that the lion with wings represents Babylon. And then after that now, it makes mention of a bear with three ribs in his mouth. So when we're reading this particular slide piece right here, the three ribs that was in the bear's mouth is Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. Make sure you pay very close attention to detail. All right, let's move on. Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 5 to 6. And as I, Daniel, was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west. So first we had a ram, now we have a he-goat. And the he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the reason why, again, paying very close attention to detail, the reason why the he-goat, which is Alexander the Greek, he was able to conquer the known world at that time in about 10 years. And so what it says now is that he touched not the ground. It only is sharing with us the speed and the consistency that Alexander the Greek had in conquering these nations. He went with force and with speed. And once again, he was able to do this now in around 10 years. Now, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes, and he came to the ram, which is now the Medo-Persian Empire, that had the two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and he ran unto him, which is the ram, in the fury of his power, which is the goat. Let's read on. And I saw him come close unto the ram. The I is the he-goat, Alexander the Greek, coming against now the ram, the Medo-Persian Empire, or more so now the Persians. And he was moved with choler or hate against him, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. And he smote the ram and broke his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, which is the he-goat, Alexander the Greek. But he cast the Medo-Persian, him, down to the ground and stamped upon him. And there was none that could deliver the ram, which is the Medo-Persian Empire, out of the hands of the Greeks. That's how that is read in its context. Now, in Daniel, the 8th chapter, verse 20, it reads, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. Once again, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. Daniel 8:8. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great. All right, so the he-goat would be Alexander the Greek. Alexander the Greek. All right. Let's read on. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great. Hold on one second, Mishpachah. All right. So, therefore, the he-goat waxed very great. And when he was strong, the horn or the great horn was broken. And for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. And once again, these four notable ones that came up after Alexander the Greek are Cassandra, Lysichamus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Those are the four notable ones that came up after the death of Alexander the Greek, and they ruled towards the four winds of heaven. All right, we're making good time here, making very good time. Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 21 to 22. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, or the king of Greece. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, Alexander the Greek. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, are four kingdoms. Very important. There are four kingdoms that shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. Now, they did say that Alexander the Greek had a successor, but he was too young to actually take rulership, and he died. Some say that he didn't have an heir. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, all right, just to let you know that I am aware of the writings and some of the history that Alexander the Greek might have had a son, but some said that, again, he died because of some type of sickness. All right, so just wanted to throw that out there. Let's go to the next slide. And again, Mishpachah, we are making good time. Let's see, I think I might have missed something here. Okay, slide 18. Let me back up here a little bit. Verse 9 and 10 in the book of Daniel. This is where it gets extremely interesting. And I can't miss this point right here. We can't miss it. We're now talking about the little horn. The little horn is what's in question here. So let's get down to the meat and potatoes of all of this here. And then it says now, and out of one of them. Is out of them meaning out of Cassandra, Lysichamus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy? Or are we talking about this next horn is coming from out of one of the directions, meaning the north, south, east, or west? That's what's in question here this morning, and it's been debated for I don't know how many years. But where did this little horn come from? And I believe I have the answer, along with others. I'm not the only person that is saying this. So let's read this. Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 9 through 10. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great. That's going to be very important. Exceedingly great. And when he had waxed exceedingly great, he had a military campaign that moved towards the south and towards the east and toward the pleasant land. The glorious land, the pleasant land, is talking about it made a conquest against Jerusalem. And once again, it waxed great. Meaning now is that if it waxed great, that mean now is that it didn't start off great. It waxed great, it grew great. Now, this little horn became so bold in its greatness that it even magnified, or it waxed itself great even to the host of heaven. Now, this little horn cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. This is my argument here, Mr. Picard. Under which of the metals or which of the beasts was responsible for the death of the Mashiach? My argument is the death of the Mashiach did not happen under the little horn. The little horn is a Macedonian Seleucid king, Antiochus Epiphanes. The Mashiach was not yet born during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greek, the Macedonian Seleucid Empire. There was no Mashiach at that time. But it makes mention now that this little horn waxed exceedingly great. And when we look at succession, it made mention that the Medo-Persian Empire grew great. All right, that's succession. Then it makes mention now that the he-goat, which is Alexander the Greek, it grew very great. Then it makes mention now that the little horn grew exceedingly great. So look at succession. We have the Medo-Persian, once again, empire grew great, meaning now that the Medo-Persian Empire was greater than the Babylonians. I'm talking about as far as its control landmass is what I'm talking about. But obviously, the rulership or the metals now or the conditions for Israel begins to worsen because gold is more superior than than silver. And so we see now the metal image is depleting in value as it goes down, but the Medo-Persian Empire was greater than the Babylonians. So after the Babylonians, we have the Medo-Persian Empire that grew great. Then the he-goat, which was Alexander the Greek, grew very great because Alexander the Greek now was able to conquer the Medo-Persian Empire and every kingdom that was underneath the umbrella of the Medo-Persian Empire. Then comes up the little horn. The little horn, grows exceedingly great. Meaning now is that its conquest was greater than Alexander the Greek and greater than the Medo-Persian Empire. When we begin to look at Antiochus Epiphanes, and we're going to talk about him a lot here this morning, is that Alexander the Greek came up, he was the 8th Seleucid king. The 8th. He was the 8th out of 20, it was either 28 or 29, but I'm leaning more towards 29, all right? So he was the 8th out of 29. But it made mention now, as we go ahead with the rest of the story, that that the little horn came up at the end of their empire. And now 8 is not the latter end of 28. 8 is not even the middle of 28. So what I'm trying to share here, Mr. Picard, is we must follow the timeline. So I'm arguing that the little horn in Daniel chapter 7 and the little horn in Daniel chapter 8 is making reference to the same horn, but in different phases. Once again, the little horn of Daniel chapter 7, because we did go into Daniel to chapter 7 a little bit earlier. Again, because there's a little horn mentioned there too. And they're one of the same, but they're operating under different phases. So I pray that that was understandable. Let's move on. Where did the little horn come from? All right. Where did the little horn come from? Notice that the little horn grows, Mr. Picard, it grows. It grows towards the south, the east, and the beautiful land. If it grows in those three directions, then logically, I believe it must originate from the north or the west or both. This little horn did not come from out of Cassandra, Lysimachus, Seleucus, or Ptolemy. This little horn is speaking of the Roman Empire. Now, when I make mention of Cassandra, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, I'm discrediting those four men for the purpose of sharing that is not referring to Antiochus Epiphanes. That's all that I'm doing. I'm not saying that the Romans didn't have a connection with those four generals there, or one of those four generals. I'm only trying to share that Antiochus Epiphanes was not the little horn. So let's read on. Let's take a look at a map below and see these directions coming from the north or west or both. And remember, the small horn grew exceedingly great towards the south, the east, and towards the beautiful land. Now, if we are building off the pattern of Daniel 2 and 7, then the next geopolitical power is Rome, hands down. Rome came from the north and west and grew exceedingly great. I am not discrediting the atrocious, the horrendous things that Antiochus Epiphanes did to Jerusalem. And we can clearly see that now during the time of the Maccabees. Okay, I'm not taking that cruelty away from Antiochus Epiphanes, and he will pay severely for that. But the next horn that comes into play is not Antiochus Epiphanes. Let's take a look at this map here. Let's take a look at the map. So in this map here now, it is showing now these three specific locations, and this is Rome. This is Rome as she grew. And Rome hit her highest plateau as far as greatness is concerned about 117 AD. Once again, Rome reached the highest point of her royalty or empire in about 117 AD. Let's move on. The next thing, or the next king in succession, I believe, is Rome, and once again, not Antiochus Epiphanes. Therefore, the little horn is Rome. Remember, the little horn grew exceedingly great. Notice how Rome grows exceedingly great towards the south, the east, and the beautiful land. This is where reading is going to come into play. And guess what, Mr. McCart? I like to read. So the south represents Rome's conquest of the city, kingdom of Carthage in northern Africa during the Punic Wars from 264 to 146 BC. The west describes Rome's conquest of Greece in the four Macedonian wars from 214 to 148 BC. And just for argument's sake here now, if anybody wants a copy of this slideshow presentation, I will give it to you for free. For all practical purposes, Greece was conquered at the Battle of Pydna, and I talked about this before months ago. Okay, only thing that I'm doing here this morning is putting icing on the cake. This is the reason why this class is for the advanced readers, because everybody should be somewhat familiar with the Punic Wars and with the War of Pydna. We talked about this plenty times before. So anyway, the beautiful land, or the glorious land, depending on your Bible version, is a clear reference to the Father of God's land, which was Daniel's homeland of Judea. And you can see now this in the book of Jeremiah, the 3rd chapter, verse 19. Also in the book of Ezekiel, the 20th chapter, verse 6 and verse 15. So the words beautiful and glory in the below scriptures are originally from the same Hebrew word sebi, and we have that now in bold emphasis. All right. And let's tackle that. Let's look at that, Mishbekar. Let's look at that. Jeremiah, the 3rd chapter, verse 19. Then I said, Jeremiah, then I said, how I would set you among my sons and give you a pleasant land, the most beautiful inheritance of the nations, which is the beautiful land which Daniel is talking about, that comely, that beautiful, that pleasant land. That land is talking about Jerusalem, the most beautiful inheritance of the nations. And I said, you shall call me my father and not turn away from following me. Ezekiel, the 20th chapter, verse 6. On that day, I swore to them, Israel, to bring them out of the land of Egypt into a land that I have selected for them, flowing with milk and honey, which is the esteem or glory of all lands. Once again, this pleasant land goes by many epithets now: beautiful land, glory land, pleasant land. All of this now is making a reference to Jerusalem. Ezekiel 20 and 15. Also, I swore to them in the wilderness that I would not bring them into the land which I had given them, flowing with milk and honey, which is the glory of all land. And so we do know that first generation that came out of Jerusalem, out of Egypt, died in the wilderness. They died in the wilderness. So it was the second generation that actually went into the land, but the first generation didn't because of the sin as it pertains to the golden calf. Now, the Roman Empire is the small horn or the little horn with its extraordinary geopolitical conquests. Notice that Rome, for example, the small horn, grew exceedingly great towards the south, the east, and the beautiful land. This is precisely how Rome expanded geographically to become one of the greatest empires of the world. That Rome is the small horn is also consistent with the sequence of empires in Daniel's 2 and 7. First, the Medo-Persian Empire, then Greece, then Rome. While Rome grew exceedingly great in terms of military dominance and conquest of the surrounding territories, it is not the same as magnifying oneself exceedingly great. However, we'll note the difference shortly. For now, just note that Rome grew exceedingly great, but did not magnify herself exceedingly great. Not yet. All right. So again, what I'm trying to do is show the parallels between Daniel, the 7th chapter, and Daniel, the 8th chapter. Daniel, the 7th chapter, now we're more centered around pagan Rome. That's the Daniel in the Romans in Daniel, the 8th chapter. Whereas in my argument is when you get to Daniel, the 7th chapter, you have Rome, the papacy. So pagan Rome, and we have the papacy. 1 second, Mr. Picard. Give me 2 minutes. 2 minutes here. Okay, Mr. Picard, I apologize for that little delay there. Had to take a little drink break. Okay, we're halfway done, Mr. Picard. We are halfway done. I want to thank you for your participation here this evening. Yea, Daniel 8 and 11. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. My argument is that the prince of the host, the prince of the army, is actually Yahushua Ha'Mashiach himself. So he is the Romans. So yes, the Romans magnified himself or themselves now, even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Now, if we're looking at the first century, and we're looking at during the time of the Mashiach's ministry, during the first century, the metal that was in play was the Romans. Hands down. But at this point, Rome had not grown exceedingly great. Because remember, Rome had reached the height of her empire around 117 AD. So when the Mashiach is in Jerusalem and he's doing his ministry and he's talking to the 12 tribes of Israel and he's talking about redemption and he's talking about the sanctuary, and the sanctuary that he's talking about being cleansed, it is not referring to that temple or that sanctuary now that was standing during the first century that was being ran by these unlawful Pharisees and Sadducees. Meaning now is that during the time of the first century, you had a heavenly high priest and an earthly high priest on earth. The heavenly high priest came to earth chastising and reprimanding the earthly priests because they had abandoned their rightful positions as leaders for the nation of Israel. Two forces at play. A heavenly high priest descends on earth to share with the Pharisees that your time is up. The 490 years is just about up. And that 490 years, looking at 457 BC, that 490 years came to an end in AD 34. AD 34. So this is the reason why it is very important for us to understand the Moray vision and the Kazon vision. So once again, looking at Daniel 8 and 11, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, I believe to be the Mashiach, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Remember, heaven and earth must mimic one another. There's a heavenly sanctuary, and there has to be an earthly sanctuary. You don't have the complete picture of the puzzle if only the heavenly sanctuary is in operation in righteousness, but the earthly sanctuary is in disarray. You can't have that. So again, one must mimic the other. So let's move on, Mr. Bakar, with the rest of the presentation here. So family, what is going on in succession between Daniel 7 and 8? To my far left, I have Daniel, the 7th chapter. And look how it describes succession. In Daniel, the 7th chapter, it makes mention of Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, Greeks, Rome, the 10 kings of the 10 toes, the little horn. Then it makes mention of the 1,260 days or years here. And I'm arguing that this is talking about years. So once again, Daniel 7 is Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greeks, the Romans, the 10 kings, the little horn, 1,260 years. Now Daniel 8 now, remember, Daniel is in Babylon, all right? Daniel is in Babylon, but he's now in a vision state where he's now in Shushan. And so Daniel picks up with the Medo-Persian Empire and what is happening there. He talks about the Greeks, and then he talks about the little horn. But watch this, Mishpachar. we begin to talk about now the 2,300 evenings and mornings, which I'm arguing is 2,300 years. So we see this gap between the 10 kings and the little horn. So we have to, how do we bridge that gap there? And this is the reason why I shared earlier, is that in Daniel, the 7th chapter, we're talking about the little horn here is actually making a reference to the Roman Catholic Church, versus Daniel, the 8th chapter, is talking about Rome, the Roman Catholic Church and pagan Rome. Let's expound upon that, all right? Let's continue on with the slideshow. Is there a resolution for Daniel's little horn vision? I believe that there is. Now, the little horn, again, I believe to be Rome. Again, it's going to take a lot of reading, and we're going to do some reading here today. All right. So the Macedonian Wars were a series of conflicts fought between the Roman Republic and the ancient Greek kingdom of Macedonia from 214 BC to 148 BC. These wars resulted in the gradual conquest of Macedonia by the Romans and the establishment of Roman dominance over the Eastern Mediterranean region. Now, the Macedonian Empire, the Seleucid Empire, is going to be very important in helping us to understand how this little horn grew exceedingly great as it made its conquest, conquering other nations. Remember, we talked about the Punic War, the Punic Wars. All of these wars are very important as we see Rome now beginning to take center stage. Thus, the conquest of Macedonia in 168 BC. Now, this is where Rome is now putting both feet down on the ground, 10 toes down. I'm here. I am now here. And this happened in 168 BC with his final conquest against the Macedonians. So the conquest of Macedonia in 168 BC set in motion a process by which Rome gradually absorbed the entirety of Greece into its growing empire, transforming the Greek world into a vital part of Roman civilization. And so we now have the conquering of Syria in around 64 BC, and the conquering of Egypt, which is Ptolemy, because remember he talked about Seleucid and Ptolemy, and that empire was conquered around 30 BC. All right, all of this information can be, you could just Google it. It's really that easy. Just Google it, and all of the information is there. You don't have to really go out there and spend all these hundreds and hundreds of dollars on these books there. Some of these books I do have. A lot of it I have on PDF, and I'm gathering a lot of this information once again, just basically off of academia reports that I subscribe to, and I just get these letters, based upon what I'm reading, and they just send me the information. I just read it. And I try to be as thorough as possible in reading the information, seeing whether or not the information is correct by doing a comparison, making sure that it falls in line with Bible prophecy and with scriptures, especially here with Daniel. And if the glove fits, it is what it is. I mean, there's no getting around it at all. Now, Mishpachah, everything that we just talked about, let's see whether or not it's true. How did Rome, the little horn, look as it grew to a world superpower? As you have it in yellow, as it began in its early stages in 272 BC, you see that it was only conquering that little boot there that you see, which is Italy. And then as it grew around 133 BC, we see in the orange, We have Greece, and we have the other little country. They're going to put the bifocals on here. We have Asia, and we have Spain. We have Sicily, and we have Africa. But it continued to grow during the time of the Mashiach. We have in AD 14, in the red, we have Gaul, the Germanic islands, and that's going to be very important because the 10 toes that I'm sharing here is the 10 toes is actually making reference to these Germanic barbarian tribes. Those are the 10 toes that actually invaded Rome. And then comes up a little horn with the assistance now that was coming from the Byzantine Empire, where we have now the Romans or the Roman Catholic Church uprooting through the help in the military now of Eastern Rome. The Byzantine Empire conquered 3 of the 10, which gave us 7, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we have, during AD 14, again, we have the Gauls, we have the Germanic tribes, Pannonia, Galatia, Egypt, Numidia, Syria, Cyprus, Crete. And then we have in green, in 117 AD, she's now at the height of her power, where we have Cappadocia, we have Armenia, Mesopotamia, and Mauritania. So we see Rome is now the world superpower at this time around 117 AD. Again, this map, just Google it. All of the territories that Rome conquered at the height of her power. So again, it's just up to the individual how much reading they want to do, but the information is right there, right in front of you. I mean, it's no great mystery. The information that I have, it is available to anybody. And again, it just depends on how diligent the person wants to be in their research. So, Mr. McCall, let's take a quick look at the order of concessions again in Daniel, the 8th chapter. We have the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay. We have Greece. Okay. We have the little horn. And my argument is that the little horn is a kingdom. It is a kingdom. So we have the Medo-Persian Empire, we have the Greeks, and the little horn, which is a kingdom, and that kingdom is talking about Rome. And then it goes on to talk about the 2,300 evenings and mornings. All right. Daniel, the 7th chapter, verses 1 to 2. All right. Because I'm trying to bridge and link the two so that we can get a clear understanding on who this little horn is. So, Mr. McCarr, there's a little horn in Daniel chapter 7 also. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Now, this vision here now is not Kazon and it is not More. It's Kasev. That's important. And so then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea. And we know that the great sea is making mention of nations, peoples, and tongues. That's what the word sea means Hebraically. We talked about that a zillion and one times. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea. Each one of these beasts now were diverse from one another. The first was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. So this represents Babylon, and the wings just represents its speed and its swiftness on how it was able to conquer Assyria and all of the other neighboring countries around it. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, which I believe it to be the Medo-Persian Empire, which is the bear. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth, and of it between the teeth of it. And they said and they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. Now this bear here represents the Medo-Persian Empire, and the three ribs that's in its mouth represents Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. Again, Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. Then Mishpachah, after this I beheld, this is Daniel 7:6, after this I beheld, and lo, another beast came up from out of the sea, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. And this is now Alexander the Greek, Alexander the Freak, whatever suits your fancy. Looking at the behavior of Alexander, I call him Alexander the Greek / freak, which had 4 wings on his back as a fowl. This fowl, Mishpachah, is actually an eagle, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the 4 wings represents speed, okay, speed. And a leopard now actually is a fast animal by itself. But can you imagine now that it has 4 wings? And this is the reason why I mentioned earlier that Alexander the Greek was able to conquer the New World at that time in around 10 years. So it made mention that that he-goat had moved so fast that its feet didn't even touch the ground. It just represents speed. In the 4 heads that you see there, Mishpachah is making mention once again is Cassandra, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. And so the beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. It is the 4 heads that is attached to the leopard. Now, this is where it gets very gruesome. Very gruesome. Daniel 7:7. After this I saw in the night vision, and behold, a 4th beast. Watch this now. Watch the characteristics of these animals. The 4th beast was dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. Exceedingly. Now remember, in Daniel the 8th chapter, we made mention that the little horn was actually exceedingly great. In Daniel the 7th chapter, verse 7, it makes mention that this 4th beast, which is Rome, is exceedingly strong and great. So I'm only trying to draw parallels here, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together, trying to show that the little horn in Daniel chapter 7 is the papacy. It's Rome, but it's Rome in a different phase as it grows. Verses now in 8 is talking about pagan Rome. Now watch what happens now. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So we have a further explanation of the beast here versus Daniel 8. So Daniel chapter 7 goes into very descriptive language, helping us to understand exactly what is going on with this 4th beast here. Now, the reason why it's called a beast in Daniel 7:7 is because Rome encompassed the Babylonian Empire's characteristics. It encompassed the Medo-Persians' characteristics. It encompassed the Greeks' characteristics. So when you blend all of this together, Daniel saw a beast, and this beast had 10 horns. So if it had 10 horns, that means that the 10 horns are associated with the beast. A no-brainer. The 10 horns are associated with the beast, and the beast is the little horn. Watch how this plays out. We're going to go to the book of 2nd Ezra in the Apocrypha. Second Ezra in the Apocrypha, and we're going to the 12th chapter. Second Ezra in the 12th chapter. I'm going to check the lines. Is everybody okay here? Okay, hallelujah. My sister Sharon, she's always on point. Hallelujah. All the same to the Father for her and all of her help. Now she has here now some help here for the brother. Here she has, and the temple of the Father was open in heaven. She's reading now on Revelation 11:19. And the temple of the sovereign was open in heaven, and there was seen in the temple the ark of the covenant, the ark of his testament, and there was lightnings and voices. Absolutely, you're 100% correct, and we're going to get into that a little bit. All right, very good observation. Now, Ezra gave a identity of this fourth beast. And this is in 2nd Ezra, the 12th chapter, and I'm going to start with verse 7 and read down to 12. Let's get a pinpoint, accurate description of who this fourth beast is. And I, which is Ezra, said, Sovereign, that bearest rule, if I found grace or favor before thy sight, and if I am justified with thee before many others, and if my prayers intercede be come up before thy face, comfort me then, and show me thy servant the interpretation and the plain difference of this fearful vision. Okay, we're still talking about this vision in Daniel 7 and 8. Ezra is seeing the same vision. Watch this now. Comfort me then and show me thy servant the interpretation and the plain difference of this fearful vision, that thou mayest perfectly comfort my soul. For thou hast judged me worthy to show me the last times. And he said unto me, This is the interpretation of the vision. The eagle Daniel, whom thou sawest come up from the sea, is the kingdom which was seen in the vision of thy brother Daniel. So this vision is an eagle, but it was not expounded unto David, which is him. Therefore now I declare it unto thee, Ezra. So again, putting the pieces of this puzzle together, Mr. Carr, is going to be extremely important. So let's make sure that we pay very close attention to detail. Is everybody still there with me? Okay. Okay, we have my sister here, Sharon. Okay. Open in heaven. Right. Hallelujah. Okay, we are on point. Everybody's on point. We're just about done. Just about done. Daniel 7 and 8. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were three of the first horns plucked up. They were plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were the eyes like the eyes of a man, in a mouth speaking great things. I did a class already when we began to look at the history of the Roman Catholic Church and the things that they've changed, the things that they've altered, the vicar of Christ, which means the changing or the replacing of Christ. You now make your confessions in a confession booth, where you're now making your confessions now to a priest, a Catholic priest, and no longer to the Father. When the Mashiach was very clear on how to pray, in the book of Matthew, I think it's the 6th chapter, it makes mention with the Talmudim of the Mashiach had asked the Mashiach, how do we pray? All right, let's move on. It makes mention, let's see, I think let's skip one. Yeah. Let me see here. 33, 34. Yeah, 34. Slide number 34. Daniel 7 and 9. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, okay, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. So Daniel, the 7th chapter again, Mr. McCall, the order of succession goes this way. Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greeks, the Romans, the 10 horns, the little horn, and then it makes mention now of judgment is set. Judgment is set. So I'm here to share with you, Mr. McCall, that I believe that we are living in some very serious times. Daniel, the 7th chapter, expounds a lot more in succession on how these kingdoms ran. Once again, Daniel, the 7th chapter, explains to us in detail how these kingdoms ran. Let's move on. Daniel 7 and 10. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, and it makes mention that thousands and thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And like my sisters just brought out, Sharon, the judgment was set and the books were opened. The books were opened. And the one that was found worthy to open up the book was Yahushua Ha'Mashiach. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has prevailed to open the books. The thrones were cast down. We see a stone being carved out without hands, and it struck the beast, or this metal here now, upon the toes, the 10 toes here now, and it made mention now is that there was nothing left of that image. My argument here is that that stone that was cut out without hands is the ushering in of the new kingdom, because that stone now became a mountain and it grew and it filled the whole earth. That's how the sequence of events is supposed to happen according to the writings of Daniel. It should get no easier than that. All right, let's move on. Verse 37, Jeremiah 17 and 12. It says, a glorious high throne from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. So once again, a glorious high throne from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. So it has always been about the heavenly sanctuary, and the heavenly sanctuary was supposed to be a carbon copy of in Jerusalem. Meaning now, once again, one is supposed to mimic the other. You have a high priest, which Moses spoke nothing concerning of as far as priesthood, and then you had an earthly priest. The heavenly priest, which is the Mashiach, manifested himself on earth, contending with the earthly priest on earth, sharing with them that they were not in the image of the heavenly sanctuary, and that's the reason why 70 AD had to take place. Okay, let's move on. Now, again, Antiochus Epiphanes isn't the little horn of Daniel 7 or 8. Now, this is where we're going to do some reading at Nishmakot, and then we're going to close the show. My source is Eric S. Gruen, Hellenism and Persecution, Antiochus IV and the Yahudim of the Jews. And here we have at the bottom a picture of a coin of Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, the reign of the reign of Antiochus IV Epiphanes brought monumentous upheaval to the land of the Jews. Okay, everybody understand that. Judea had for nearly a century and a half enjoyed a relatively untroubled existence under the sovereignty first of the Ptolemies, even of the Seleucids. So at one time, everything was pretty cool between the Ptolemies and the Seleucid dynasty. Hold on one second. Excuse me. But turmoil struck in the late between the early 170s BC, followed by civil strife and then a hideous persecution. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, as we have now in this coin here, as it appears, endeavored to extirpate Judaism altogether from the Holy Land. That endeavor, stunning and memorable, stands in dramatic contrast to all that had gone before. Early Greek attitudes toward the Jews, insofar as they can be discerned, were more often favorable than unfavorable to the Yahudims, that is now. Okay, now the Jews in turn became, watch this now, and this is the reason why I had talked about Cornelius in a particular light, this centurion in a certain light, and the woman at the well in a certain light that became controversial. And I said, listen, is it possible that they were Israelites? And some said that no, it is impossible that they were Israelites. I said, so it's not even slightly or remotely possible? No. So, but what? We have to understand what was going on during the time of the Maccabees. Watch this. Now, the Jews in turn became increasingly familiar with the adaptive to Hellenism. Increasingly familiar with this now, because Israelites began to change their names from Hebrew names to Greek names. Watch this. Now, the Seleucids ruled in Palestine had been respectful and protective of Jewish institutions. Antiochus' reversal of form thereby becomes the more striking and more baffling. The Seleucids gained supremacy in Palestine through the victories of Antiochus III in the Fifth Syrian War at the beginning of the 2nd century BC. Now, everything was cool between the Yahudims and the Antiochus III. Okay, everything was cool. The king entrenched his success by showing favor to the Jews for their assistance against the Ptolemaic rivals of the wars that was going on at that time. He expressed gratitude through a number of measures that bestowed privileges and promised tangible assistance. This included aid in rebuilding the war-battered city of Jerusalem. He helping of the repair of the damaged temple, the restoration of exiles, subsidies for sacrificial services, various exemptions from and the reduction of taxes, an endorsement of traditional Jewish religious prescriptions, and an express declaration that the Jews were to govern themselves under their own ancestral laws and institutions. Those benefactions set the throne for 3 decades, 30 years, Mishra, of cordial collaboration between the Seleucid regime and the Jewish nation. Greek populace, Jews became Greeks in a sense. They became Hellenized. The mass majority of them flourished in Palestine, and we can have a figure here in 38, I'll show that. And Greek intellectuals felt the influence of Hellenic culture. The appointment of the high priest, it appears, was subject to the approval of the Seleucid monarch. But the office remained in the hand of the onads. The family that previously controlled it and its occupants in the 3rd century, Simon the Just, both cooperated with Antiochus III in implementing the restoration of the temple and city, and received high praise in the excuse me, get horse here. Contemporary work of Ben Syria, a prominent advocate of traditionalist Jewish values, mutual advantage in the relationships between Jewish leaders and the Seleucid overlord persists in the years of Onias III. Onias III is going to be a very important character here. Very important character, right? A high priest here. Successor to Simon the Just and Seleucus IV, heir to Antiochus III. Jerusalem. So the author of 2nd Maccabees reports enjoy complete peace and exemplary administration of the laws through the piety of Onias and the generous subsidies of Seleucid. The serenity did not last, though, Mishpachah. Trouble began in the Seleucid reign, or his regime, stemming from individual ambitions and family rivalries within inside of the Jewish states. So it was the Yahudim now that's beginning to cause these problems here. A quarrel erupted between the high priest Onias III and a certain Simon, financial overseers of the temple. The latter, so the hostile account in 2nd Maccabees implies, sought to extend the responsibilities to the regulation of the market, thereby prompting appeal to the king's representatives and a suggestion that the funds contained in the temple treasury might be made available to the Seleucid regime. Did you just hear that? Suggesting that the funds contained in the temple treasury be made available to the Seleucid regime. And this was something that Simon had did in his contempt and hatred towards Onias III. This is now some of the beginning stages now of Jews wanting to be Greeks. And it talks about that now in Maccabees, the 1st chapter, where it makes mention that these Jews now wanted to become Hellenized. Let's read on. The climax of the clash is told in the wonderful tale of Heliodorus, the royal minister who endeavored to confiscate the temple funds. Heliodorus, impervious to human pleas, was turned back to the temple gates by the arrival of the magnificent horse which kicked him, and 2 glorious, handsome young men who beat him to a pulp, causing the wretched minister to be carted off. In a litter acknowledged the sovereignty of the Jewish God. The story, of course, is apocryphal, so they don't know whether or not that story was true, but the Yahudims did confront or conform to Hellenistic Greek ideology. We almost finished here, Mr. Ricard. Let me do this, all right, because this is a lot of reading here. Let me just get out the key points. All of this is very important, and I would, if anybody wants the this slideshow presentation, please make a request. Let's talk about Simon here a little bit, his beef that he was having with Onias III. So I'm at the second part of this paragraph here. It says, simple strife, however, intensified. Simon escalated his attacks against Onias III, and one of the high priest supporters was murdered, thus causing him to seek the intervention of Seleucus. So now Onias III is seeking help from the Seleucid dynasty. The timing proved unfortunate for Onias. His trip to Antioch came at or very near the time that Seleucus himself was assassinated in 175 BC. The throne passing now to his brother Antiochus IV. This is where all hell is about to break loose for Israel. Now, newly arrived in Syria after nearly 15 years as a hostage in Rome. So like I shared earlier, Mishpachah, Rome was now at the stage of growing. Prior to Antiochus Epiphanes coming on the scene, Antiochus Epiphanes was a prisoner in Rome for 15 years. This is the reason why I'm charging that Antiochus Epiphanes was not that little horn. Rome had come into power after the Greeks, which is now the little horn that grew exceedingly great, and he actually had Antiochus Epiphanes in prisoner as a Rome for 15 years. Worse still for Onias, his removal to Antioch left him vulnerable at home. His own brother Jason seized the occasion to aim for the high priest. Now the new ruler in Antioch concurred. Jason shrewdly offered cash as a bribe as presented by, as we see in 2 Maccabees, and in fact, a promise to increase revenues through higher taxes, and this proposition will appeal to Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who needed funds to bolster his image and to finance his ambitious plans. So we see Mishpachah where the priesthood now was for sale. And we have now Jason now going to Antiochus now in a position now to buy a seat for a high priest in Jerusalem. And Jason now was so wicked in showing alliance to Antiochus Epiphanes IV that he changed his name from Jason to Jesus. I think it was Jesus that he changed his name to. It was Jesus, not Justice. It was Jesus. All right. So let's read on, because there's a lot of information here, Mishpachah. A lot of information. We remove that. Let me get to the point here. Here it is here. And this will be the last slide here. Antiochus had gathered resources and recruits for an assault on Egypt, all right? And there's a lot of information on that. The king conducted two major campaigns. The first in 170 or 169 BC, the second in 168, with the intent of bringing the Ptolemaic realm under his dominion or his domain. The initial thrust earned considerable success, a smashing victory over Egyptian forces, capturing of the territory, and the enthronement of the young Ptolemy, who would be a client of Antiochus Epiphanes. The blatant power play, however, encountered stiff resistance in Alexandria. Antiochus returned to Syria in late 169 BC, perhaps to build additional resources and firepower. He readily now another invasion for spring of 168, which resulted in notable advances for the Syrian cause. Egyptians, they crumbled. Antiochus seized the ancient city of Memphis, became lord of Upper Egypt, and he set his sights on Alexandria itself. It was a high-water mark for the Seleucid authority in this region, but not for long. The Colossus from the west had concluded to a decisive victory over Macedonia in the Pyrrhonian War. Now, news of the victory released the Roman mission headed by C. Populus Laenius charged with termination with the Sixth Syrian War. Populace arrived in Alexandria at the opportune moment. Antiochus' forces had just reached the outskirts of the city at the suburbs of Elysius. In one of the most celebrated episodes of antiquity, the Roman envoy confronted Antiochus Epiphanes. Watch this now. The Roman army confronted Antiochus Epiphanes and delivered the Sentius, it's called the Sentius Consultium, that demanded the end of the hostilities of Antiochus Epiphanes. The king hesitated and a request to recess for consultation with his staff. But the Romans now, Populus Blenius, in a stunning display of arrogance, took a stick. He drew a circle in the sand around Antiochus Epiphanes IV and asked for a reply before he stepped out of that circle. That is a bold move. Now, if Antiochus Epiphanes was so bold, you have Rome now coming to the aid, stopping Antiochus Epiphanes, because he wanted to now expand his campaign as far as Alexandria. But Rome said, oh, no, you're not. No, you're not. Watch what happens. Populus now draws a circle around Antiochus Epiphanes and asks for a reply before he stepped out. This time it was clear that Rome meant business. Antiochus meekly evacuated his troops from Egypt and his fleet from Cyprus. The day of Elias, as it has come down to know, cast a dark shadow over the Seleucid Empire, aspiration, and the reputation of Antiochus Epiphanes. And so we have here, when you read that letter, it made mention to Antiochus Epiphanes. If you step out of that circle, this means that you want to go to war with Rome. And Antiochus Epiphanes declined. He did not want to go to war with Rome. He was so humiliated by Rome, he went back to Jerusalem and raised hell on Jerusalem because he was so embarrassed that he could not go to war and defeat the Romans. And this is the reason why, Mr. Ricard, timing is very important. The little horn, Mr. Ricard, was not Antiochus Epiphanes. The little horn was actually the Romans. And Mr. Ricard, that is my class for today. I pray that everyone got a chance to enjoy it. And if anybody wants a copy of this slideshow presentation, because I skipped out a whole bunch of stuff because of time. All right. And so, Mishpikar, once again, I'm going to end today's class. And I thank you for all your love and support. And until the next time, Mishpikar, I'm going to say shalom, shalom. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you.